If today we have a wave of superhero movies that rule the movie screens, in the 80s and the 90s we had a prelude of this era with many more obscure superheroes. Starting in 1989 with the big hit of Batman from Tim Burton, a movie that already had this Gothic noir style in both its production design and the tone of the story. The success and popularity of this movie made studios consider more comic book adaptations to the screen, in productions that also had this somber vibe. Movies like The Shadow, Darkman, that on itself is not a comic book adaptation, but it takes a lot of elements from comics, Blade, and especially The Crow, one of the cult classics of this era in the 90s, that took some elements from 89's Batman and elevated this whole Gothic noir idea to another level. Released in 1994, it is directed by Alex Proyas, a director that has a very interesting visual style, but his movies variate a lot in terms of quality. After The Crow, he directed one of the most interesting sci-fi movies of the 90s that was outshined by The Matrix, called Dark City, a fantastic movie that I will talk soon here in the channel. But he also directed some very poor movies like Gods of Egypt. But anyway, he has a very strong visual flair for his movies, and his first big success was The Crow. And for those who don't know, the production history of The Crow has this element of tragedy since its conception from the comic book before the movie. Published in 1989, the comic book series of The Crow was drawn and written by a creator called James O'Barr, and perhaps is one of the most beautiful pieces of art created in comic books history. A story created and drawn by James O'Barr himself. We have the character Eric Draven that is in a road trip with his girlfriend Shelley and is forced to stop the car by the road. Then they are approached by a gang of criminals that brutally kill him and abuse and kill Shelley. And during this crime, one of the killers shoots Eric in the head and he gets paralyzed, being forced to watch the violence of the gang members against his girlfriend. This is when a crow, an entity for another plane of existence, lands next to Eric and asks him to let his life go so he can go to another plane and come back to take revenge against these criminals. A very strong and shocking idea that kind of represents what happens in real life with the writer James O'Barr. In his case, he also lost a girlfriend very tragically in a hit-and-run situation where the guy who was driving the car escaped and was never caught. After some years, he wrote the story of The Crow, and through the arts of creation, he was able to deal with his own grief. And this sadness and grief can be seen in each frame of the comic through these black and white illustrations that highlight the darkness, bringing something that is very unique and powerful with each image. This is a piece of art that was born from a tragedy and also went through another tragedy when it became a movie in the loss of the actor Brandon Lee, because he was accidentally killed during the shooting of the movie because of a strange material inside the gun being used as a prop in the movie was not seen by the production and the gun was fired at him. So it's very strange to think how tragedy goes through these two versions of the same piece of art. But The Crow from 1994 fortunately could be finished by the production even after the actor's death, because there were only a few scenes for him to finish. So using some shadows and computer-generated effects, a stuntman could be used to finish his scenes. And this brought us a great classic that still lives in our memories, especially because of its style and its punk, rock, and gothic soul that influenced some looks at the time, and I gotta say, is so impactful that I think it still affects some looks today. A couple of years ago, I saw a teenage girl in the bus that was wearing the Crow makeup, which is a pretty recognizable one. So I think this mix of melancholic and rock, especially because of the character Eric Draven that was a guitar player, still communicates very well today with some generations. And the movie's plot follows very faithfully the comic book story, with Eric Draven and his bride Shelley being murdered, with some differences because the murder here is shown through flashbacks. And then the Crow entity comes down on his tombstone and wakes him up from his grave. giving him the opportunity to avenge his beloved and kill all of those responsible for it. I love the movie. It's strange to call the Crow a superhero. For me, he's more like an angel avenger, but that has superpowers because he's basically invulnerable. And even though he has action in it, I don't think it is an action movie per se, like any other superhero movie. Brandon Lee was an action star, and he was growing very fast with movies like Rapid Fire, Showdown in Little Tokyo, movies that were giving him some visibility even though he had started to make action movies way before. I remember one that is a pure trash classic called Laser Mission. It's pure action trashiness, but it's a lot of fun as well. But he was growing very fast in this genre, and I think The Crow would be the movie that would solidify him as an action star, especially for being a more serious movie and a break point in terms of quality in comparison with the other movies that he made before. This is another level of artistic piece of art. Through the documentaries with the making of The Crow, we can see that Brandon Lee had a lot of love for this project, and he was giving his 100% for it. He already had a great charisma that we could see through his other movies, but here he brings this to the character of Eric Draven, making him a figure that, even though he has his moments of sadness and crying, he also has many funny and operatic moments. You can see that the Crow is delighting with his new condition and superpowers. So he loves to torture all the guilty ones for the murder of his bride, both physically and mentally. All this supported by a cast of side characters that is really good. We have Ernie Hudson, that was one of the Ghostbusters, here as a police officer that is kind of the Commissioner Gordon to the Crow as Batman. And both actors have great chemistry with their characters. We also have the little girl Sarah, that was a friend of Eric Draven and his bride Shelley when they were alive. And for being a little girl in this tragic and dark city, this connection that she and Eric have, especially after he comes back to life, it's used to show us his human side and not just the killer avenger. And if the movie has a kind of weak spot, is the villains. They are not so impactful, especially because their crimes are shown through flashbacks. So there's little dramatic weight to them. In the comics, everything was shown with much more brutality. So it's way easier for us to feel anger towards the villains in there. But anyway, here is fun to see the Crow killing them one by one. So now let's talk about what I most love in this movie, that is the production design. The Crow City has all the touches that I love in movies like this. The whole Gothic tone and mood, the fact that all the buildings look like maquettes. The camera is always traveling through the city, showing us how scary and somber it is. You have the element of the rain that makes the whole thing look a lot more dirty and muddy. It looks like an abandoned place, almost like a purgatory before hell. And besides the Tim Burton's Gotham City inspirations, all these visuals also show the strong flair that Alex Proyas, the director, have in creating the atmosphere of this world. And I think this is a care that movies nowadays doesn't have anymore, or at least I don't see. Every city or place looks bland, and it doesn't really have any unique atmosphere. I love it with a passion. And speaking about things that I love with a passion in this movie, the soundtrack that was released at the same time as the picture, it is one of the best soundtracks ever created for a movie. As a lover of soundtracks that are created exclusively for motion pictures, something that is lacking a lot today, the collection of songs in this CD is wonderful, and there are two of them that I love from the bottom of my heart. And these are songs that I not only listen when I remember the movie, but I listen to them frequently. One of them is Big Empty from Stone Temple Pilots, a band that I listen frequently to all their songs, a really melancholic and slow song that fits the movie perfectly. And another song that is one of the main ones is Burn from The Cure. This one is a little more agitated, and it plays in one of the best scenes of the movie where Eric Draven puts some makeup on to finally go out and avenge her bride. So all these elements make The Crow one of the most unique movies from the 90s. And with the success that the movie was, of course the studios wouldn't miss the chance to make sequels, or many of them in the case. There was a Crow 2 called The City of Angels, A very weak movie, but that also has a great soundtrack, like the first one. There was a TV show of The Crow with Mark Dacascos playing Eric Draven in it, and it lasted only for one season with 22 episodes. There was a third movie called Crow Salvation that I haven't seen any frame of this movie, but it has a curiosity because Kirsten Dunst is one of the main actresses in it, so that's kinda interesting. And there was a Crow 4 called The Wicked Prayer with Edward Furlong as the protagonist, John Connor from Terminator 2. Of course, none of these productions reached the peak of the first movie's success, but this didn't prevent the studios from trying to remake the original one, with many directors, many scripts, and many actors attached to play the role. We had Luke Evans, Bradley Cooper, Jason Momoa, believe it or not, and he actually made some makeup tests in the Crow's makeup for the production before it was cancelled. Then we had Tom Hiddleston, until we finally arrived in Bill Skarsgård in the new movie that is being released now. By the way, all these actors were attached to play a version of Eric Draven, so it wasn't another character being woken up from the grave by the Crow. But there were some other versions of stories that wouldn't feature Eric Draven as the protagonist for a new movie. And there was one idea between these ones that interested me a little. It was gonna be called The Crow Bride, but it was not the bride from Kill Bill, okay? It was a bride that was murdered in the altar with her groom, and she came back to life to search for revenge. And I know this could have been a strange and horrible idea, but my Gothic soul kinda got interested by this one. I think it could have been fun, maybe. Oh, and by the way, there was also a version of a futuristic Crow that was going to be directed by Rob Zombie. Thank God this one didn't happen. And now we have this new version with a remake that is already being blasted by everyone right after the first trailer was released. And I also have to admit that I have no interest in it. I think Bill Skarsgård is a good actor. He might do a good job in it. But it's the third time he's gonna play a character from a remake. He was Pennywise from It. This year, he is also going to be Nosferatu in a new remake. So when Hollywood is going to give this guy an original character for him to be known as? Probably never, since all the studios and producers are sick looking for properties to remake instead of creating new ones, right? But anyway, there you go. I wanted to make this video about the original Crow to remember us how classic this movie is. I love it so much that I made an illustration some years ago about it. And I know it's very crappy, but it goes to show that this movie gives me so much inspiration that makes my artsy soul want to create things as well. And this is it, guys. If you are liking the content of Trashing with Gus, please leave a like in this video and don't forget to subscribe in the channel for more trashiness in the future, alright? See you in the next trashing video and bye bye.